In 2025, 7 undefeated fighters lost their perfect records during the first 3 UFC events. In this edition, we'll revisit some of the most notable instances in recent years when fighters who had never experienced the bitterness of defeat felt it in full force. 10th place, Ian Garry. For the notoriously famous Irish fighter, the end of 2024 seemed to promise nothing bad. That year, he had secured 2 victories over Jeff Neal and Michael Page, improved his ranking, and brought his own record to 15 wins with 0 losses. In December, he was set to fight Hakeem Buckley at the final event of the year, but just a couple of weeks before, everything turned upside down. At UFC 310, a title fight in the welterweight division between Belal Muhammad and Shavkat Rakhmonov was called off. The champion injured his leg and pulled out of the event. On the other hand, the Kazakh prospect expressed his desire to stay on the card and fight any opponent that matchmakers could find for him. The only fighter in the entire division who wasn't afraid to take on the scariest prospect in the division on short notice was Ian Garry. Fans had grown accustomed to laughing at his ridiculous behavior, so no one saw this turn of events coming. For the Irishman, it was a justified risk, as a victory would have made him the next contender for the title. Garry stepped into the cage and gave Rakhmonov the toughest fight of his career. He felt confident on the feet and didn't let his opponent wrestle. The Irishman managed to take his back in the closing moments and seriously threatened with submissions. Never before had Rakhmonov found himself in such a position. Garry became the first fighter Rakhmonov couldn't finish in the cage. In the end, the Nomad still took more rounds on the judges' scorecards. So in the battle between 2 undefeated prospects, it was the Irish fighter who came out on the losing end. But it seems like he gained far more from this loss than from all his previous wins. If you're going to lose your perfect record, this is the way to do it. 9th place, Tatsuro Taira. The young Japanese fighter made his way into the world's Premier League as quickly as a kamikaze pilot, but after picking up speed, he collided with an opponent who was just too tough. Taira entered the UFC with a record of 9 wins and no losses, broke into the top 15 of the flyweight division within a couple of years, and began 2024 with a victory over former title contender Alex Perez. The title race in the flyweight division was in such a dire state that rumors started circulating online suggesting that Taira might immediately get a title fight against Pantoja. This wasn't surprising, as the undefeated Japanese fighter was in the top 5 and was considered the top prospect in the entire division. However, instead, Tatsuro got a contenders match against one of the toughest fighters in his category, Brandon Royval. Royval had been close to a title shot several times. Nevertheless, Taira entered the fight as a strong favorite. From the very beginning of the bout, it was clear that the fighters were on different levels when it came to striking. Royval outstruck Taira by a significant margin, forcing him to take more hits than in all of his previous fights combined. As always, Tatsuro focused on wrestling, and with that he managed to claim the second round. But the more he took in the stand-up exchanges, the harder it became for him to close the distance. Driven by mental toughness, Taira won the 2nd and 4th rounds, heading into the final stretch with the score tied at 2 rounds apiece. But in the final moments, Royval was fresher and sharper. He even managed to take Taira's back and nearly finish the prospect. The judges scored the fight unanimously, marking the first loss in Taira's career. He is still only 25, and he hasn't fallen out of the top 5. So his future in the sport now depends on the lessons he takes from this defeat. 8th place, Robelis Despain. The Cuban heavyweight went from being one of the most hyped newcomers in the league to getting released and facing a flood of hate from fans all within a single year. At the beginning of 2024, the UFC introduced a new addition to the heavyweight division. Robelis had competed in the 2012 Olympics in judo, had the longest reach in the promotion, and boasted a perfect record of 4 wins and no losses in MMA. All of his victories came by knockout, with 3 of them taking a total of just 20 seconds. Despain was being talked about as the new Ngannou, with predictions of a bright future in the UFC, and the promotion gave him the opportunity to debut at one of the biggest events of the year, UFC 299. Robelis further fueled the hype when he took out Josh Parisian in just 18 seconds, showing the same dominant form. It was hard to imagine a better debut, but everything changed in the very next fight. Waldo Cortos Acosta exposed huge gaps in Despain's takedown defense and work on the canvas. It turned out that the former Taekwondo practitioner was absolutely ineffective in this area. He spent most of the fight on his back. In the end, he meekly lost by unanimous decision, losing his undefeated status. The defeat to Acosta happened in May, and by October, Robelis lost in a similar manner to Austin Lane, after which the matchmakers finally gave up on the idea of promoting the hyped-up newcomer. By the end of the year, the fighter was released from the promotion, rehabilitated in the Karate Combat League, and has now reappeared in the promising GFL project. The rise and fall of the would-be star was even more rapid than his ascent, 7th place. Peyton Talbot. The 26-year-old bantamweight only recently emerged on the UFC radar, but he has already become a favorite among Gen Z fans. A striking appearance, a hairstyle reminiscent of Sean O'Malley, anime-inspired tattoos, painted nails, and skateboarding as a hobby in his free time, everything about him seemed designed to attract a young audience. On top of that, Talbot was making waves inside the cage. By January of 2025, he had built a record of 9 wins and 0 losses, with 8 of those victories coming by stoppage. He had fought 3 times in the UFC, never going the distance, earning back-to-back performance bonuses and scoring a knockout over Yanis Gamori in just 20 seconds. With the new year came the need to step up the level of competition. He was matched against seasoned veteran Raoni Barcelos. The Brazilian was not ranked in the top 15 but was far from an easy target. Even so, Talbot entered the fight as a massive favorite, arguably the biggest on the entire card. Fans started to sense trouble when they noticed the prospect had changed his look before the fight. Peyton shaved off his signature curls and walked into the octagon with a short haircut. The result? The first loss of his career. Raoni focused on wrestling, securing takedowns in every round and racking up control time. Even when the fight returned to the feet, Barcelos held his own against the young prospect. The Brazilian exposed Talbot's weak spot, takedown defense. By repeatedly dragging the fight to the mat, he secured a decision victory, rewarding those who had taken the risk of betting against Peyton. Now, the American fighter must go back to the drawing board, shore up his weaknesses, and find a way to reignite interest in his career. 6th place, Shamil Gaziev. A heavyweight from Dagestan representing Bahrain, his story is yet another case of matchmakers rushing a promising newcomer into the deep end too soon. In September of 2023, Shamil appeared on the Contender Series, securing a submission victory in the first round and extending his unbeaten record to 10 fights. Just 3 months later, he made his UFC debut on a major event, UFC 296, where he finished the tough Martin Buday early in the second round. The league's executives saw him as ready to take on the division's elite. After all, 10 of his 11 career wins had come inside the distance. Gaziev combined high-level grappling with knockout power, making him a threat in all areas of the fight. His next test came quickly, a matchup against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. The Surinamese fighter was past his prime and had lost 3 of his last 4 bouts, but he still held the 12th spot in the rankings. In only his second UFC appearance, Gaziev was given the main event slot. The promotion clearly had high hopes for him, but the jump in competition proved too steep. Rozenstruik refused to be taken down, stayed at range, and systematically broke Shamil down with his jab. With each passing round, the once undefeated heavyweight's face grew redder. His breathing became labored, and his movements slowed significantly. By the midway point of the fight, exhaustion had taken hold. Before the start of the final round, the cage-side doctor stepped in and determined he was unfit to continue. Gaziev had missed his chance for a fast track up the rankings, losing his undefeated record and being forced to take a more measured approach. Now, nearly a year after that fight, Shamil has finally broken into the top 15. To do so, he had to get past two unranked opponents and deliver a highlight reel finish against Thomas Peterson. Fifth place, Magomed Gaziasolov. Another Dagestani fighter representing Bahrain and the KHK gym, Gaziasolov earned his UFC contract through the Contender Series. At the time, he had 6 wins with no losses, 4 finishes, experience competing in Eagle FC and Brave, and a highlight reel featuring his signature move. Magomed had thrilled fans multiple times with a Showtime kick, an unorthodox strike made famous by Anthony Pettis. Seeing it executed by a light heavyweight was a rare spectacle. After securing his UFC contract, Gaziasolov ran into trouble in his debut. Brazilian fighter Branson Ribeiro relentlessly attacked his leg, limiting his movement and preventing him from performing at his best. Despite the setback, he managed to keep his undefeated record intact, edging out a split decision victory. His second appearance in the cage came at the first UFC event of 2025, but this time, things went south. Magomed delivered another lackluster performance, spending extended periods in passive clinches, showing little in the striking exchanges, and running out of gas by the end of the second round. The result was the first loss of his career. The promotion clearly wasn't impressed, and by the end of the same month, they announced the release of the once promising light heavyweight. Now, Gaziasolov finds himself searching for a new home, but he can no longer sell himself as an undefeated prospect. Fourth place, Yaroslav Amosov. The Ukrainian middleweight went undefeated for 11 years, building a record of 26 wins and no losses, earning comparisons to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Known as Dynamo, he held the Bellator championship belt and was widely regarded as one of the strongest fighters outside the UFC. Amosov spent 6 years competing in the second biggest promotion in the world, facing top-tier opponents like Logan Storley and Douglas Lima, holding on to the title for more than 2 years. But in the fall of 2023, he stepped into the cage against Jason Jackson. The Jamaican contender was a serious threat, boasting an impressive frame and wins over Benson Henderson, Paul Daly, and Douglas Lima. Heading into the fight with Amosov, Jackson was riding a 6-fight win streak, with every victory coming by decision. He had never been known for finishing opponents at the highest level, and no one expected him to do so against an undefeated champion. Unfortunately for Yaroslav, things went sideways from the opening bell. The Ukrainian fighter looked slower than usual, and his greatest weapon, his grappling, failed him that night. The fight reached its breaking point in the third round. Jackson landed a precise uppercut, sending Amosov crashing to the canvas before unloading a series of brutal follow-up strikes that forced the referee to step in. It was the first loss of Amosov's career, and it came in devastating fashion. More than a year has passed since that night, and Yaroslav has yet to return to the cage. He campaigned hard for a rematch with Jason but never got his wish. When Bellator began the process of merging with the PFL, he opted not to re-sign, waited for his contract to expire, and within a few months, he officially became a free agent. Third place, Anatoly Malekin. The biggest star of the Asian promotion ONE FC, the Russian fighter had been in a league of his own for his entire career. Fans had spent years waiting for his move to the UFC to see how he would fare against top-tier competition, but in Asia, he looked a level above everyone. Anatoly seemed to have fun in the cage, dismantling nearly all of his opponents in the first round. He claimed the heavyweight belt, then dropped down to light heavyweight to take a second title, defeating the previously undefeated Rainier de Ridder. Not stopping there, he cut to middleweight, handing the Dutch fighter yet another loss and making history as the first ever 3-division champion across all major global promotions. Malekin repeatedly stated he had no plans to leave ONE, expressing lifelong gratitude to the promotion's boss for believing in him and giving him the opportunity to secure financial stability. It seemed like Anatoly would continue running through unknown contenders and padding his flawless record until the unexpected happened. Senegal's Oumar Kane had quietly built a 3-fight winning streak, going undefeated for 3.5 years. With Malekin having cleared out all the top contenders in the heavyweight division, Kane was next in line. What happened next turned out to be the biggest upset of 2024 outside the UFC. Coming in as a heavy underdog, the African fighter managed to drop Malikin with a flash knockdown and secured several takedowns.
Malikin looking to remain undefeated.
Anatoly fought hard to turn the fight around, but in the end he suffered a split decision loss. The champion handled his first career defeat with absolute dignity. He didn't look for excuses, apologized to his family and fans, and admitted that on that particular night, his opponent was simply better. Now, he is fully focused on preparing for the rematch. Second place, Shara Bullet. From the moment the red-haired pirate made his way into the UFC, skepticism followed. Just yesterday, he was competing in small amateur promotions, and today, he was expected to go toe-to-toe with the best fighters on the planet. Many believed he wouldn't be able to handle the sudden leap in competition, especially given his well-known weaknesses in wrestling. But from his very first fight, Magomedov set out to silence the doubters. His debut against Bruno Silva wasn't easy, but he showed that while he struggled with takedown defense, he was more than capable of attacking aggressively from the bottom. After that, he cleared out 3 more opponents with vastly different styles. He dealt with the lanky Antonio Trocoli, took down the stocky knockout artist Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, and bested the physically imposing kicker Armen Petrosyan. Shara quickly became a fan favorite with his high-paced fighting style. Within a single year, he fought 4 times, secured 2 highlight reel finishes, became the first fighter in UFC history to land a double spinning back fist, and earned 3 consecutive Performance of the Night bonuses. Before long, he had built a strong following, particularly among Arab fans. However, due to an issue with his eye, Shara was unable to compete in the United States, which meant all of his fights took place in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Still, his momentum was undeniable. He built his record to 14 wins with 0 losses, broke into the rankings, and was finally recognized as a serious, highly skilled striker with a bright future. Yet, instead of continuing his climb up the division, Shara agreed to face Michael Venom Page, who moved up from welterweight to middleweight specifically for this fight. As expected, Venom turned out to be a nightmare stylistic matchup, and the Dagestani fighter struggled to find any openings. What followed was the worst performance of Shara's career, resulting in his first professional loss. That single defeat was enough to knock him out of the top 15 and push him out of the middleweight division entirely. Now the dynamic fighter has no choice but to rebuild his momentum from scratch and reignite the hype that once surrounded him. First place, Umar Nurmagomedov. January 2025 was supposed to be a moment of triumph for Khabib Nurmagomedov's team, and for the most part, everything fell into place. Islam Makhachev avoided a difficult showdown with Arman Tsarukyan and instead secured an expected title defense against Renato Moicano. Usman Nurmagomedov faced some adversity, but managed to pull off a gritty win over Paul Hughes. Even Tagir Ulambekov added another victory to his record, handing Clayton Carpenter his first career loss, though Carpenter ultimately didn't earn a spot in these rankings. The only exception was Umar Nurmagomedov. He had a golden opportunity to fight for the bantamweight title and bring a second UFC belt back to his home gym. But to do so, he had to get past Merab Dvalishvili. Heading into the fight, Umar was seen as the clear favorite. Many had already dismissed the reigning champion, but in reality, this was the toughest challenge of Nurmagomedov's career. He had limited experience against elite competition and lacked the battle-tested resume of his Georgian opponent. Meanwhile, Merab was known for his relentless cardio, ability to push an insane pace, and seamless blend of striking and wrestling. All of these factors played a major role in the title fight against the undefeated Dagestani contender. Umar controlled the first 2 rounds with confidence, but as the fight progressed, Dvalishvili steadily took over. He forced the challenger into deep waters, drained his gas tank, landed key takedowns, and found success on the feet. In the end, the champion won the final 3 rounds and took a unanimous decision victory, becoming the first fighter to defeat anyone from the previously undefeated trio, Khabib, Umar, and Usman. This victory solidified Merab as a champion who demanded respect. As for Umar, He refused to accept the loss, citing a hand injury suffered early in the fight. Now he is taking time off for recovery. However, at just 29 years old, he still has plenty of time to earn another shot at the belt.